So today we're going to create some Windows Forms applications, and got Visual Studio Code, or Visual Studio I should say, 2022 up. First thing you want to do is create a new project. Click on the new project bar here. You see some of the recent project templates I've used and we've used in the class. For these Windows Forms applications, we're going to do almost like the console apps. We're going to use Windows Forms apps, the .NET framework. So you can click on that, you can double click on it, whatever you want to do, and it'll open up the configure your new project window. I will just call these Windows Form app examples.
Hey, Mr. G, just curious, does the .frame network behind Windows Form app matter? Because mine has Windows Form app, but it doesn't have the framework after it.
Some of it might not produce the code like it should. Like when we were doing the console apps, how it had the, if we didn't use the .NET framework, it wouldn't have all the pre-populated code and stuff for you, and that it would.
Is there a way for me to get that? Would I just do it through the installer, I guess?
I'm surprised it doesn't have.
Oh yeah, that was what was throwing me off.
Yeah, so yeah, if you can't find it, when you install this, depending on what you select, it can put a ton of different templates in over here on your right hand side. You may have to go up and search for a template style that you're looking for. And so let me go back to next. I'm calling this WFA examples for Windows Form application examples. I am going to put it out in one of my old repositories, and I'll throw that up in examples. Looks like I already started creating one. Let me go ahead and delete this one. Oh, let me rename it. I'm just going to select the examples folder. You can see it's going to stick it in the wrong folder. I'm going to get rid of that and just put it in examples. So again, same thing when you're doing these Windows Form applications as you were doing with your console applications. You get your project name. Make sure you put your location where you need it to be. You should be working most of these out of your local repository. And their local repository, most of them get stored in documents and then under GitHub or something like that. So just kind of watch where you're putting them. If you're not paying attention, a lot of times they'll stick it in like users, your username, sources, and repos. Yeah, so if you for some reason can't find it or didn't pay attention where you saved it to, more than likely it's going to be out there somewhere, and you can always copy it and paste it over, whatever you need to do. I'm just going to leave my solution name the same. Call it whatever you want. Go ahead, create this. Here's my Windows form. It says Form 1 up in the top left corner. If I want to go change that, I can go to the text. Yeah, I don't care. Go to the text, and I will call it Windows Form Application EX1. And that should change the text up here from Form 1 to Windows Form App Example 1. We don't do a whole lot with that, I don't think, in this class, but if you just want to keep it from always saying Form 1 or ever, that's how you go in and change it, kind of clean it up. Get my toolbox over here. So first thing I'm going to do, and most of the time you do on this, is I'm going to drag over, double click, whatever you want to do on a text box. So I'll double click puts it up in the upper left hand corner, and then you can drag it wherever you want it.
Wait, how do you open the toolbox?
If you go to View and then scroll down, it should say Toolbox. You click on that. after I opened it.
Yeah, the toolbox.
Yeah, once you open the toolbox, you'll see it on your left-hand side here.
Look for common controls.
Yep. There's all, you can do all Windows forms, common controls. Most of the time we just use this common controls. We will use the containers occasionally. I think one of the labs you need a group box or something like that on it. So, and then what I like to do is if you look up where it says toolbox up here, there's a little thumbtack looking thing up here. You can pin it. I pin it, and that way it's always there, and that way you don't have to keep opening it up and looking for it. I pin that, and I pin the properties down here in the bottom right-hand corner, and that way my properties are always there. So as I'm going through and creating these, my properties sit here, and it's just easy to access them and change what I need to change on them. So, did you find it all right? Get set up?
Yeah.
All right. So then I double clicked on that text box to bring it up. It comes up in the upper left hand corner. You can also highlight it, drag and drop it in here. And you put it there. And as you see, as you line these up, you'll see lines that kind of help you do with the layout. So,
If you like click and drag to do like a box to highlight everything to, you can move everything as one unit too.
yep, so you can go around there like that, and then they all stay hooked together. You can click on the handles here and make them longer if you want. You can make them shorter if you want. So we got a couple text boxes in here now. Let's go ahead and throw a button in there since we know we're going to want a button. So you can either, like I said, double click on it, drag and drop. If you want more than one button, you can hit Control C, which is the copy the button, and then Control V will paste it, and then you can paste as many as you want or need. A lot of times with text boxes, that will come in handy with text boxes and labels. I think when we do the shopping inventory one, it has quite a few text boxes on it, so you may want to do that. I'm going to stretch my button just to make it a little bit bigger, stick out there a little bit more. And then we need some labels, that way we know what these text boxes are for. So drag my label over, drop it. I need at least 2, but I'm going to need more than that. I want a label to show my results down here, and then I want another label to actually display my results. You can use a text box if you want or whatnot. The label's kind of nice because it's going to end up being hidden. You won't see it until we actually put something in it. A text box sits there until it does display something in it. So now that we got that kind of set up, everybody good on that if you're coding along and doing what you want to do. So first thing I'm going to do is name my text boxes and all that. So you see text down here in the property for a text box. There is no text because we don't need any text in there. You can put some in there, kind of like a pre-populated text. So if I put test shows up in there. I don't want any text in there. I like them blank, so I'll get rid of that. So you scroll down through properties, you have behavior, you have data, you have design. We want that design where it says name. And in the naming convention for these Windows forms, we want to start our text box out with a TXT. That way we know it's a text box. And I'm just going to call this number 1, since I'm just going to do some math problems to start out with. So again, we use camel casing for this, so my T for text is going to be lowercase, the N on number will be uppercase, and then whatever I follow on with will also be uppercase.
I think you're changing it to move the entire form.
What's that?
I think you're changing
You're
it
under
to the
form.
entire form,
I did do that, did I? So I am on my form again, huh? Now I'm on my text box. My form is still called WFAEEX1. And it did change it there, huh? WFAEX1. There we go. So there my text box is called. I need to change that to TXT number 1. So you can see up here under properties it shows where you're at. So I'm on that system, Windows form, text box. So I know I'm on my text box. Click my form, there's my form.
Mr. Duke, could you full screen your and make it easier to see?
Full screen my what?
The app, the Visual Studio.
If I full screen it, then it kind of goes off
Oh, okay.
the screen up here,
It's kinda hard to see,
unfortunately.
but if I just make it a little bigger.
I'm recording it, so if worst comes to worst,
Okay.
I can always look at the recording. So there's my first text box. I call it text number 1. My second text box, I'm going to call it TXT number 2. And again, up here in the appearance, under text, there's nothing there. I want my text box blank. You want to get crazy, you can play with all these border styles, the colors. Fortunately, I know last semester students were spending more time making it look nice rather than actually coding it out, and unfortunately that's not going to get you points. So then we'll go on our button next, since that's the next one down. Now we do want to change the name on this one. For our text, we'll take it from button 1 and we'll call it calculate. You can name it whatever you want. And then down in the design part again, the name, we need to change that. We're going to call it BTN calculate. You can call it whatever you want, but start it with BTN because it's a button. Naming convention, we want that lowercase btn. And then again, camel case, so then the C on calculate will be capitalized. Any follow-on words, the first letter will be capitalized. And now our labels, we'll go up to the top label up there. The design for the name, for a label, we call it LBL. And I'm just going to call it number 1 here on also. And in my name up top, under text, I'm going to call it enter number 1. So then when I do it, you can see it says enter number 1 on there now for our text. Label 2, I'm going to do the same thing for text. I'm going to say enter number 2. I don't think I named my label down at the bottom, so let me go down here and change it to LBL number 2. So just remember on the labels, the buttons and that, you change the text under appearance, and then we also need the name, change the name under design to fit our naming convention that we do. So we have our enter number 1 done, we have our enter number 2 done, so let's look at label 3. Label 3, we call it LBL result. So under design, name, again you use a naming convention, it's a label, so we'll call it LBL result. Scroll up to the text under the appearance tab. And we'll call it result there. So I'm going to scoot my result over a little bit. now for my label 4, that's where we're going to actually display our result. So the text, I'm going to get rid of the text because I don't want anything showing up there until I display something. And then for my design, under that, my name, I'm going to call it LBL display result. And you can see it's camel case again. My L for label is lowercase, the D for display is capital, and that R for result is capital. So now we pretty much got our layout done the way we want it. If we want to resize our window, all you have to do is grab one of these handles. You can drag it around to get it to resize. Like I said, you can play with the appearance if you want to. We're not going to mess with that too much. We don't do a whole lot of it here in class. So now to actually start doing our coding, we go to our button. You double click on your button, and it starts wiring it up for us. It gives us our private void button calculate click method here. Pass parameters in if you want. We don't mess with that very often. And again, just like we did the console apps, when you see the private void button calculate click, that click is an event. It means it's going to do something when we click on it. Well, inside the squiggly brackets after the parentheses, that's where we put our code in to actually run something. So what we have to do is we have to get the values that the user's entering. Excuse me. So we'll do an int, and we'll call it number 1. And again, the data type is the int. The variable that we're creating, we're calling it number 1. We're going to assign it a value, and that value we're going to assign it is whatever text they're entering in that text box number 1. So what we'll do, and because when it comes in through that text box, it's text, it's a string. And again, yeah, so for the int to talk to a string, we got to convert that string to an int. So we'll do a convert to int32, and you can see my IntelliSense wants to use that button calculate text. We don't want that. We do want the to int32. And as we're looking at those data types yesterday, you can see the int16, int32, int64, and there's a to uint16, to uint32, and to uint64. The most common one is this int32. If you want to use a smaller size, you can use a 16, a larger size at 64, but int32 will usually catch whatever we need.
Is there actually a reason to want to use the other ones then?
It's more of a sizing and saving of space, memory space and that. So
Because I was wondering like why we would just never not use like the biggest one we could just to catch everything, but that makes sense.
yeah, because then you take up a lot more memory space and that in the code. So you used to be able to just do to int, but it seems like every time I mess with it, it kind of wants to throw an error and wants you to select 16, 32, or 64 anymore. So then we do that. Now we got to go get our value, and we're going to get it from our text. And you can see in IntelliSense, we only have 2 text boxes that we created. And it's giving us text number 1 and number 2. We're going to take number 1. You can double click on it, or you can type it in. And then we want the text out of it, so we got to put the dot text behind it. So when we put objects on this form, these are technically objects that we're putting on here. These are all objects. Go back and look at our code, and you can see we're using the object called text number 1, and then we're getting one of the properties out of it, which is that text. So it's holding that value of text in the property text for our text number 1 object. So we got that. We always end the line with the semicolon. If we don't, you can see the red squiggly. It's mad. It says a semicolon is expected, so let's make it happy, put that semicolon in there. So now we got the value for the first text box, we need the value for the second text box, so we can do an int number 2 equals, and IntelliSense being somewhat as good as it is knows we want to code for this number 2 text, so tab through it. That sets us up for there. So now that we have the data we want back from the users, we need to do something with it. So we will create another int called total, and we'll assign it the value of number 1 plus number 2. And a lot of this is just the same as these console apps. The only thing different now is we're using these objects, these control items that we're putting on these forms to get our information and to do what we want, instead of just having that write line and read line get it from the user on the console. So now that we got our math calculation set up, we want to display it onto the screen. So then we're going to use our label display result.text, and again this label display result is the object, that .text is the property out of it. And so we're going to do a total to a string if we wanted to, and that's another way to convert it. And I will leave that like that for a second here. I'm just going to comment it out. And we can do label display.text. I'm going to take that off. And then I'm going to use string interpolation here like we were doing for the console apps. To me it just looks better, easier to read most of it, even though that total to string is pretty easy. So I will say the total of and then string interpolation, to get your variable to show up, we have to use the squiggly brackets there. I can zoom this in for you guys. So we'll put squiggly bracket, we want number 1 plus squiggly bracket number 2 equals, and we're going to have it equal the total So then if we run this, and again when we run it, we hit the clear, I don't know, clear green arrow, what would you call that?
I would,
The non-colored in.
the not filled in.
Yeah, green arrow. That just starts it without debugging. We don't want to debug because hopefully this was a simple application where we don't need to worry about too much debugging on it at this point. So if I click the arrow and run it, a window comes up, got all my text and everything. So we'll do 5 and 5 and calculate that, and then you can see our result down there. String interpolation says the total of 5 plus 5 equals 10. Yeah, Liam. Let me get the further one first. He had his hand up. That's said it's kind of odd having 2 Liams in the same class. Go back up to this solution, WAF examples 101 project. We can right click on that. We can add a new project, just like we did with the council apps that we worked on. Windows Form App.NET Framework, make sure we select that one that we're using. Go to next. I'll call this example 2. Still sticking it in the folder I wanted to. I'll create that. Got my window up. So we'll average out 3 numbers is what we'll do on this one. That way we can use a couple more text boxes, do a little bit more coding. So of course we're going to need our text box again. We're going to need 3 of them. So I'm just going to do double click on it. I'll bring it up. There's my text box. I'm just going to Control C, Control V 2 more times. Now I got 3 text boxes up, ready to go. Somebody asked the question earlier, when you're entering numbers and you hit enter, it doesn't drop down to the next text box or anything. With the council apps, that's how you put those numbers in, is by hitting enter to get the next question to pop up. With these, we're using text boxes, so everything we need is already on the screen. And so if you want to save some time moving through the text boxes instead of having to mouse click on each one, you can hit the tab key instead. So the tab should tab you through each text box and hopefully get you down to that button. And the first time I gave you an example of this, and I will show you again as soon as we get this kind of set up, how to set your tab numbers so you can just tab through what you want. So we got 3 text boxes. Oop, and I didn't want to do that. So if you accidentally double click on one, it'll start populating it for you. So it starts wiring up that text box I accidentally clicked on. I don't want that, so I want to go back to my design that I was working on. I got my text box I accidentally clicked on, highlight it. I go to this lightning bolt that's here in the property box. Click on that lightning bolt, and you can see my text changed is what I highlighted here. That's what caused my code to show up here, is because I did that text change, and you can see the event here is that text changed. So I'll go back to my designer. I can see text change for text box 2, text changed. I don't want that, so I delete it out. I delete it out, I go back and look at my code, and now you can see that's removed from my code. If you leave that there and just go delete it out of your code, you're gonna run into some issues. You'll get an error of some sort because of it. If you accidentally double click on something, always use the lightning bolt. Find the event that you set and delete it out, and then it removes it from your code and you won't have any issues with it. So I got my 3 text boxes. I know I need 1 button, so let's do a button. I'm going to drag and drop it, just to drag and drop. I'll expand it to match up with my windows. I'll make it a little bit bigger. 3 text boxes, my button. We're going to need some labels. And I'm going to need like 5 of them, so I'll bring my label down here so you can see it. I'll do a Control C, Control V. There's label 2, 3. I don't like that it's doing that. 4 and 5. So I got my labels scattered all over the place. I'm going to take them, just kind of line them up. Put label 4 down here as my result, and label 5 is going to be my actual results that I'm going to return. So now we got our form set up again, laid out the way we want it. Now we got to go through and set all the properties for it. So I'm going to do my text boxes first. Click on my text box, get off my lightning bolt, go back to my properties. There's no text on here. Go down to my design tab here where my name is. Naming conventions, it always starts with TXT for a text box, and I'm just going to call it number 1 again. Text box 2, TXT number 2. And then third one, TXT number 3. So now my text boxes are done. I can see text number 1, text number 2, text number 3. I'll go ahead and do my button. And again, in the design part is where you use the proper naming conventions for these. So BTN. And I'll do calculate again. You can call it whatever you want. I'll call it calculate total this time. And then for my text name up here for my button 1, I'm going to call it find average. So there you can see your text shows up on your button itself called find average. You can change your font style you want, your fore color, back color. I was looking for a weight to try and make it bolder, but not too worried about it. So now we have our text box controls and our button control all coded out, or I should say our property set for them. So now let's go through our labels, set our labels. Enter number 1. So my text for label 1 is going to say enter number 1. My design name will be, again, the naming convention is LBL for a label. Number 1. Enter number 2. Our design name will be lowercase LBL. Number 2. Label 3. Design name will be LBL for naming conventions. Number 3. Set my text up here to enter number 3. Place this a little bit closer to make them look nice. My label 4. Label 4 I can call, I'll just call average. Give it the design name of LBL AVG.
I mean, it doesn't affect the project, but
And label 5 I'll call LBL result. I'll just leave it result instead of result display. And my text for label 5, I don't want any text there. That way when we populate it, it'll show up next to it and look fancy the way it pops up instead of sitting there. So now we should have our form all set up with the properties set up, laid out. Everybody good at that point?
what was number 5?
Number 5, I gave it the, get it highlighted here. Well, somewhere down here. For some reason, I'm not finding it on my screen. Let me move this over a little bit. Let's see if I can grab him. There he is. So my label 5 I called, for my design name, I just called it LBL result. And then for the text under the appearance, I got rid of the text because we want the text to show up as it displays when we code it. Let me get my button line or my label here lined up again. Yep.
Since like, say like the enter number one, enter number all.
So we should have all of our properties and everything set up. Let me get that up closer to where it should be. Just play with that a little bit. So now that we got our form all set up, the property set up on it, I want to start coding on it. And again, to start coding, all you do is double click on the event that you want. We want the button click event, so we're just going to double click on our button. And then you can see our button calculate total. That's what we named it. And then the click event to run it. We have our parentheses behind it showing that it's a method. There's a couple parameters in there. We're not going to mess with those parameters. Then we have our squiggly brackets here to actually start entering our code. So the first thing, again, what we got to do is get the values from the users, the input from the users. So we're using numbers. I'm not going to worry about doubles, decimals, floats, or anything. We'll just stick with int for now. Int, and we'll call it number 1. Assign it the value of that text box we want. Because it comes in as a text box and it's going to be a string and text, we want to convert it to an int. So convert to int 32. And then we want to get that text box, and you can see we only encode it for 3 text boxes, so the IntelliSense gives us some choices down here. You can either type it all out, or you can double click on what they give you as an option down here, or enter for the one that's highlighted. So I want that object number 1, and I want the text property out of it, so I type text behind it, dot text, and a semicolon to end that line. IntelliSense being our friend here, hopefully it will code out some of this for us. And so that's one nice thing about IntelliSense there, is that it does save us a little bit of typing time. If you prefer typing, I know some people like to type the stuff out, that's fine too. So now we got the data from our user. We got the 3 numbers that they entered. So now we're going to call it average, and it's going to be an int. So we're declaring our data type as an int, our variable name is average, and our average is going to be, and I noticed on the test some people had issues with this. We want to take number 1, add it to number 2, and then add it to number 3, and then we're going to divide it by 3. I'm going to put a semicolon at the end of my line. So if we run it like this, our average is going to be wrong every time. Does anybody know the reason why it's going to be wrong?
It's because you don't have numbers 1, 2, and 3 in parentheses.
Yeah, so what this is going to do, the way this code is here, is you have number 1, number 2, and number 3. As I talked yesterday in our order of operands, the division is going to run before anything else. So what it's going to do, it's going to take whatever number 3 is and divide it by 3. And then it's going to give you an answer. And then it's going to add 1 and 2 into this number 3. So your average is going to be wrong every single time if you run it just like this. So to make sure it runs properly, what you have to do is wrap the numbers inside a parenthesis. Oops. Inside a parenthesis. So again, on those order of operations that we do, now because it's in parentheses, the stuff in the parentheses is going to run first. So now it's going to take our number 1, number 2, and number 3 and add them all together and give us a total, and then divide it by 3. So the parentheses run first, and then the multiplication, division stuff runs second. So if you don't have this done, with all the numbers wrapped in a parentheses, it's not gonna total them right. So if we do something like this, if we do something like this instead, if we do this, it's gonna add number 1 and number 2 first, then add 3 and divide. You can probably get by with that, but that's not the proper way of doing it. You want to wrap all 3 in a parenthesis to make sure it adds all 3 numbers
Yeah,
up
Brandon
and then
did.
divides.
This is how we can contact each other.
What was the other one I saw quite a bit of?
Yeah, no, that's me.
I think more often than not, I just saw it with no parentheses or a parentheses wrapped around the wrong thing. So when you're doing an average and you want to divide a bunch of numbers, you always wrap the numbers in a parenthesis so it adds the numbers first and then divides it. So now we got that there. We want to display it out to the screen. So we do our label. Did I call it average? No, I called it result. So result dot text. I was going to show earlier that average to string. Let me comment this out one more time and I'll kind of give you an example of that. So I'm going to do label LBL result. I don't want that. I'm going to use my string interpolation again. Just like I said, it looks a lot better. The average of the 3 numbers. And then I'll put the 3 numbers here just so we can play with the string interpolation. Put the squiggly brackets. Number 1, comma, number 2, comma, number 3, comma is, and then we called our variable over here average, so that's what we want to put out to the screen. This is again squiggly brackets, average. So now when we run this, it should say the average of 3 numbers. It should show us our numbers, whatever we enter, separated by a comma, and then is, and then give us our average. So again, to run it, you take the triangle, the arrow that's not colored in, you click on that. If you have another window open, you might end up getting an error. So make sure your other windows are closed. We'll run this. Got to select the proper one out of the drop down. Scroll this over. So we'll do 22, 33, 44, and that should give us an average of 33. So let's find the average. And there it says the average of 3 numbers, 22, 33, 44 is 33. So this label result.text average.toString. If we run this, it should just give us the average and print it out. So, and it has to convert it to a string because we're using it as an integer here. But to be in this text box, we're printing it out to a string. So we have to convert it to a string. So let's run that like it is now. And I'll do 22, 33, 44, find the average. And there it just prints out 33. So that's a very basic way of printing it out. I prefer the string interpolation. That way you can mix strings and the variable numbers in there, the variables that you're using in there. Just a little bit easier to work with. You don't have to worry about converting everything to strings or ints or whatnot. You can just string interpolation it, throw strings and variables in there, and have it come out. But that's when you do the IntelliSense and it prints it out, that average to string. That's what it's doing. It's just taking this average, which we declared as an integer data type, converts it to a string, and then it just prints it out to the screen. That's where we get this 33 down here. And then, as mentioned earlier, on your form design, on your text boxes, there is a tab index on here. You can see the tab index here, down here at the bottom right. That shows you how it's going to tab through your screen. It starts with 0. Click on number 2. The tab index is 1. And then we come down to tab index 2, which is our third one. And we click on the button. It should be a tab index of 4, or 3, I'm sorry. It should be a tab index of 3. And it is. You can set those in any order you want. Usually you want to do it from top to bottom or top left to bottom right as you tab through. Just think of it as if you're filling out a form and you're tabbing through this stuff. How do you want it to tab through? Don't have it jumping all over the page. Nobody wants to fill out a form where it jumps from the top all the way down to the bottom, back to the middle, to the right, to the left. Usually you follow a nice pattern, top left to bottom right, or top to bottom as you go through. Just makes it a lot cleaner for the user to use. They won't be mad that it's jumping all over the place and cursing out the developer who developed it so wonky. So that's another one that's averaging 3 numbers, kind of shows you using multiple text boxes. Still, most of the stuff we use, we'll just use one button to do a lot of the stuff that we're going to be doing. So it's 2 examples. You guys want any more examples? Is that good to get you going? I can work on some more, and then tomorrow I'll give you some more demos of a little bit more in-depth ones rather than just some of these basic add and subtracting. But for the most part, that's all we're going to be doing starting out until we get into the loops and the if-else statements to add some logic behind it, some problem solving, I guess. So I'll stop there today to give you guys some time to work on your labs. I'll do some more demos at the start of class tomorrow. Just keep you familiar with it as we go through this.